Okay, so we are on week 5 of our The Woman in the Bible and You devotional. It's a weekly devotional. If you want to be able to read along, you can order it. I just ordered it off Amazon. It's by Ariane Williams. But if not, I read them every week. Okay, this week we're on Naomi's joy. I don't know if you remember at all last week we talked about Naomi as well, but we were talking about her grief more, and now we're talking about the joy side. Okay, so the verse this week comes from Ruth 4:13 through 15. Ruth bore a son. Then the woman said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord who has not left you this day without next of kin, and may his name be reowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has borne him." Last week, we talked about Naomi's circumstances at the beginning of the book of Ruth and what God can teach us about grief through her story. But by the end of the book, Naomi is a living, healed, happy life. She has moved through her hour of grief and is embracing new life and all it can offer her. In this week's verse, her community of girlfriends who had stood with her in the darkest moments now celebrate the way God has turned her deepest sorrow into overwhelming joy. She's gone from having lost her husband and children to becoming a grandmother to a child whose very existence nourishes her life. How did she get here? Rightly understood, the book of Ruth is actually just as much about Naomi. It models the way we can overcome, persevere, and be resilient in very specific ways. The first thing we notice in Naomi's journey is that grief itself is a form of prayer called lament, crying out to God in the midst of pain, and it must be understood that way. In the scriptures, lament is one of the most powerful tools that Christians inherit from the Jewish tradition. The book of Psalms is full of laments, and of course, there's the book of Lamentations. This is no meaningless complaining. Rather, it demands the attention of the heavens and calls the Almighty to be witness to the turmoil of the lamenter. Lament flings itself towards heaven and refuses to be ignored. So in her lamenting, Naomi teaches us that it's okay to cry out to God and require God's attention, modeling lament as an act of deep faith. These prayers are often full of the things we are most scared to say, which are also the things we need to say, and lament is productive. It allows us to cleanse ourselves of toxicity so we can move forward. The lesson here is to add lament as one of your spiritual tools that you initially access when you need it, intentionally access when you need it. Look at what happens on the other side of this soul-cleansing prayer. Naomi is able to begin taking action, partnering with Ruth in ways that save both of their lives. Back in Bethlehem, she is inspired by Ruth's gleaning efforts in the field, and she devises a plan to connect Ruth and Boaz, which ultimately secures both of their futures. Had she still been holding on to all that bitterness from before, she wouldn't have been able to see the possibilities that were right in front of her. Bitterness and grief can be all-consuming, but setting them free to live in the open gives us some space to tend to others' needs in our lives. Before we know it, we've slowly but surely started reaching towards the hope of new beginning beyond grief. Note that the story doesn't end with Ruth and Boaz getting married. It goes on until the birth of their child, who becomes the joy of Naomi's life. And her friends help her see that God has not forgotten her, even in her lowest moments. There was always hope. This child is evidence of that. Though Ruth bears him, the story is redeemed for Naomi when the baby is identified as Naomi's blessing. All the loss still hurts, but the child is hers to nurse, love, and nurture. The lesson here: get these kind of friends who will listen to you and stand with you in the times of lament, but also celebrate with you in moments of triumph. And it's vital that we take time with our loved ones to acknowledge what God has done for us. Notice that the story isn't over until the narrative brings Naomi some redemption, pointing to God as the one who has blessed her and reversed her fortunes. If we lament and cry out during the painful times, we should also make time to celebrate, worship, and give thanks during the high times.